Want to start off this morning with a reading by a guy named Fred Maramarco, and he wrote this great poem called A Recipe for Unhappiness. Now, I want you to try and listen to this and get to your most honest self, okay? And try to identify some of the ingredients that might ring true for you. I know I recognize more than a few myself, okay? So here it is, A Recipe for Unhappiness. 1 cup, what is? 1 cup, inability to accept what is. 3 tablespoons of complaints, a teaspoon of light whining, a fourth a pound of alternative scenario, preferably unattainable. 1 bunch of actual reality, 1 pint of idealized worldview, 2 teaspoons of perfection, and 4 sprigs of envy, kind of minced for garnish. In a large bowl, whisk together what is with an equal amount of an inability to accept it. Stir in complaints and let sit until brooding and sulking set in. And add a dash of light whining, especially in the company of friends, but be careful actually not to overseason or they won't hang around. Now, in a separate bowl, add alternate scenario to actual reality from your garden and separate the leaves from the stem. Then try to reattach leaves in exact pattern that existed before separation. Pour in idealized worldview and process in a food processor using on and off turns. And when mixture is pureed, add to what is an inability to accept what is, then blend. Add exactly 2 teaspoons of perfection and let stand until tears form. Garnish with minced envy and serve immediately. Here ends this morning's reading. I share this today because we here in Brewster, where I'm at, are in the month of transformation, but I always feel like, any month could be a month of transformation. So I want you guys to think of some of what I'm after today as what gets us to that place of transforming from one state of being to another. And this week, I really wanted to look at how we can be transformed by our relationships. It occurred to me the other day that when we think and talk about relationships or cultivating relationships, certainly, we most often focus on the nurturing part, to use a garden metaphor, actually. We talk about seeding new friendships and tending old friendships, cultivating and watering relationships with our spouse, our neighbor, our fellow congregants, or even siblings, right? All of this is certainly a big part of relationship building for sure, but it leaves out the other part of gardening, which is the weeding part. Not so much supporting growth, but getting what is hampering growth out of the way. This getting rid of the weeds part is pulling up that which is trying to strangle growth part is where this poem has led me. And it certainly gets at the need for weeding, right? I mean, seriously, who of us really, if we are honest, we're really honest, haven't at times made ourselves more disconnected from others by stirring in complaints and letting them sit until brooding and sulking set in. Or when the mixture is pureed, add to what is with an inability to accept what is not into a blender. Or this may be us. A fourth of a pound of alternate scenario, preferably unattainable, 1 pint idealized worldview, 2 teaspoons of perfection, and 4 sprigs of envy minced together for garnish. As I said, I see myself in so much of this, right? And when I'm honest, when I'm in that place, when I'm doing these kinds of things, I feel miserable, most certainly disconnected. And when I'm really, really truthful with myself, it's not the state of American politics or the climate crisis that is making me miserable. It's my everyday relationships that can make me feel that way. Because, well, sometimes it feels like they are the weeds. If I could change them or fix them or have them see their deep character flaws, well, things would be so much better. They would turn from weeds to flowers, right? As a quick aside, turns out I'm not the only one that can get to this place, which is comforting, at least to me. See, when people are polled about their own unhappiness, it's not because of the state of American politics, though that can be unsettling. It's not the prices at the grocery store or whether or not we've seen the sun in 4 days, which happens to me up here in New England, probably not to you guys in Florida that often. But, all those things can be depressing, right? It's not even simply the injustices that need to be addressed, though they can truly be unnerving. Turns out humans, like me, are most unhappy when disconnected from those they love, those they value, those they care about, and those they spend their daily lives with. And also, just like me, these polls, studies, and interviews point again and again how all of us are convinced it's the other person that needs fixed and changed and, well, maybe even plucked. We, all of us, it turns out, are convinced we see the problem clearly. It's them and their weedy selves. But, well, what if? What if it's not really that simple? I want to get to this by explaining this story, or sharing this story, actually, that something that happened to me. So my husband, Scott, and I were the co-senior ministers at First Unitarian Church in Rochester for about 10 years. And we'd often go into work together and talk about, what was coming up with the upcoming day. But on this one particular day, I was driving up by myself, and I'm on the interstate. I get off the exit to get to the church, and I noticed this huge billboard in front of me. And the billboard put me in a terrible spot. I was so frustrated and ticked off about it that by the time I got home later that night, I was telling Scott about the whole thing and, like how upset I was about how sexist this billboard was. Now, frankly, I might have been able to let it roll off my back a bit if I hadn't just returned from Albany with the communications director from Planned Parenthood, because we were meeting with state senators around a certain birth control, reproductive rights issue. And we got dismissed a little bit. It felt like it didn't feel that great. It was all men we were meeting with. And also during that week, I had just gone to a minister's meeting where I was the only female in the group, and I felt like I had been ignored nor asked to speak through any of it. So when I saw that billboard, I'm telling you, I was livid. And what I saw was this. You're going to have to imagine this and just keep this in your head, okay? Gentlemen, start your engines. Brand new high performance beds, days in. Gentlemen, start your engines. Brand new high performance bed, days in. I mean, come on. I couldn't believe they had such a sexist billboard promoting basically men getting randy. I mean, it was ridiculous. The billboard stuck with me all day. And for some reason, Scott, as I said, wasn't at the church. So when I got home, I went on and on and on about this billboard. And I told him we had to get like a petition going to take it down. And he agreed it was super offensive and he wanted to see it. I even, by the way, called up some of my girlfriends and started ranting about the whole thing and how disgusted I was, and they agreed with me completely. So you can imagine, after all of that going on, I was prepared the next day as Scott and I drove to church, and like we get off the exit again, and I look up and I'm like, there it is. And in front of me, the billboard says, gentlemen, stop your engines. Brand new high performance beds, days in. Gentlemen, stop your engines. Turns out it wasn't a sexist sign at all. It wasn't promoting using those high performance beds for lurid reasons. It was promoting them for rest. It was simply a sign for tired truckers who needed a good night's sleep. The whole thing reminded me of one of my favorite quotes ever. It's one of the most important pieces of psychology and spiritual wisdom there is. It comes from the French writer Anais Nin. She said this: "We do not see things as they are, but as we are. We do not see things as they are, we see them as we are." That's the reminder that my billboard story and Anais Nin quote scream at me again and again and again. It's also become one of my most valued reminders. And I suspect I'm not the only one that needs Anais Nin's reminder. I suspect we all need this reminder, right? I mean, we want to believe that we see clearly and judge accurately. We want to believe that we are fair and objective, that we see things as they really are. This is especially true when we are evaluating people we are in tension with or in conflict with. When it comes to these other people, well, we're pretty darn certain that they are the ones cursed with blind spots, not us. It's other people's perceptions and perspectives that are biased. Other people who are less aware and self-reflective than we are. Other people who see what they want to see, who twist reality to fit their preferred storylines. Which brings me to this study. This one about the stories we tell. So these researchers took two groups of people, right? And they gave them each a swatch of color, like a paint swatch, okay? And the first group, they gave them 5 seconds to look at this color. Then they showed them 6 other colors within that grouping. And they asked them to find the original color after like a few seconds, right? 75% of people could correctly pick the color. The second group of people, they gave 5 seconds to look at the color, then 30 seconds to describe the color as a way to remember it. And then they showed them the 6 swatches of color to pick out the original color again from, but only 33% of those people got the color right. Seems to me, as I read about that, I'm like, wow, shouldn't that be the opposite? Well, it turns out their descriptions and stories actually impaired their memory and perception rather than improved it. The conclusion from these social scientists is the exact same conclusion of my billboard story. We do not see and remember things as they are. We see and remember things through our stories as we are. Stories which, like my conversation with my husband, took place quite apart from the actual thing I was describing and analyzing. Stories about our stuff much more than they are about the world out there. Which brings us back to those weeds, those weedy people that make us miserable and strangle all the goodness out of our relationships. Again, we're sympathetic, right? I mean, it's not that we are deeming any of them bad people. It's not about morality as much as a character problem. It's their darn personality flaws. That's what leads them to giving us a hard time and causing us problems. For instance, that spouse of ours who never remembers our anniversary or birthday. Well, we tell ourselves, we're just born insensitive. Or that boss of ours. Her hunger for power is clearly in her genes, and that's why she never delegates to us and always micromanages. She's got control issues. I mean, come on. Or what about that neighbor who always gives us a hard time because we didn't set the trash out correctly, or is always complaining about our untrimmed bushes and the look of the neighborhood? That guy's got anger issues. It's all about the character, all about their character, right? But again, what if that's not quite right? What if our attributing relationship problems to their character is just another perception problem. Well, it's rhetorical. So let me just put my cards on the table here. Here's what my husband says after 3 years of marital and couples counseling boils down to for him. He is has been a marital and couples counselor for 3 years. That's a better way to say that. Sorry. Anyway, he says this: when someone else messes up, we attribute it to their character. But when we mess up, we attribute it to the circumstance. Someone else messes up, we attribute it to their character. When we mess up, we attribute it to circumstance. Now, I need to be clear. It's not really our hypocrisy I'm trying to point out this morning. It's more the fact that we don't give others a break. We seem bred by evolution to leave out the very thing that would enable us not only to understand others, but to understand them sympathetically. And unfortunately, we know how it turns out, right? It seems people tend to feel we've treated them unfairly when we simplistically blame everything about the problem on their personality rather than acknowledging the situation that surrounds them. Wow, what a shock. So they end up getting even more mad at us. And now suddenly we're in some fight, not just over the thing, but also over the fact that we're not treating them fairly about the original thing. Of course, continuing with our tendency to blame everything on one's personality, we confidently tell ourselves it is really just them being defensive about pathologically unable to accept responsibility for their own actions. So there may be some of you right now who are smiling and some of you who are not. But no matter what, friends, we all know this dance. All of us do. It's not one that ends swimmingly. In fact, it rarely does end. We all just end up stuck and mad at each other for being unfair and blind and very unhappy. So given all of that, here's my question. Could it be that our daily unhappiness is not really the result of all those mean, inconsiderate, defensive, character flawed people, but instead our tendency to see those people as worse than they actually are? Could it be that almost always the problem isn't simply their personality, but our perception? Now, don't worry, I've had too many rude neighbors and power-hungry bosses to completely let them off the hook. And indeed, I've been too rude and power-hungry myself to deny that there's not something twisted about all of this a little bit. I am suggesting, though, that just like our bad behavior, the behaviors of others has a whole lot more to do with the context rather than their character. And if we can see that and proceed with that, we might just be a whole lot happier and connected. We just might be able to transform our unhappiness to happiness. Or to put it in gardening language I started off with, in the end, it's not the people that need weeded out. It just isn't. It's our perception of people that needs shaken loose and cleared out of the way. Aristotle wrote something a long time ago, and he said this: anyone can be angry, that's easy. But to be angry with the right person to the right degree, at the right time, for the right purpose, and in the right way, that's not easy. So here's my question for you, okay? Are we going to allow ourselves to be unhappy because of these illusions, because of our inaccurate and imaginary perceptions, especially when most of the time they don't really exist? They are easier weeds to pull than we think because they aren't even real weeds. They are our fears, our past history, our biases, our own defensiveness, and inflamed egos. And if we can open our eyes and our hearts, there is no pulling necessary, really. They would just disappear. Here's the thing. Don't we want that? Isn't that what on our deathbeds we want to be happy and connected? My dad died a little over 11 years ago now, and soon after my own birthday in February, I got this tattoo on my arm, and it says, "From stardust I arrive, to dust I shall return." And I got it originally to remind me that I've got today. That's all I know. I've got today to live in the present and be in the now. But friends, as the years go on, 11 years later, it makes me think about the conditions necessary to live in the now. Being disconnected from people just makes me live in the past, ruminate about BS, or project unnecessary scenarios out into the future. Being in the now takes being gentle with myself, for sure, but it mostly is being gentle with others. Mostly being gentler with others. It takes remembering that more often than I'd like to admit, there are no weeds. It's just me making and imagining weeds. And if I can remember that, if I am confident that about that, that on my deathbed, I won't be yearning for better connection, but will have made a beautiful garden of people all around me. I wish that only, not just for me, but for all of us. If I could, I would hire 10 tattoo artists to come down to the congregation today and have them sit next to you and, write on all of your arms one of two tattoos. One that either said, "Look for the context, not the character," or "Stop seeing them as we are." Simple reminders about what cultivating relationships really require is a transformation within ourselves. Simple reminders that all of us have within us the power to be happier and more connected, to transform that which makes us unhappy to that which makes us happy. That it's a lot easier than we think to be weed free. Maybe so. Amen.